Nevada's nonprofits have had a rough month. Honestly, a rough year, with federal funding snatched away, tossed back, and called into question. Belts have been tightened, programming's been cut, staff have been let go. So today in CityCast Las Vegas, we're getting the 30,000-foot view on all of this from Miles Dixon. He's the founder of Nevada Grant Lab, and he explains the current nonprofit landscape in Southern Nevada and what we can do to help. It's Tuesday, February 3rd. I'm Sonia Cho Swanson, and here's what Las Vegas is talking about. Miles, a little behind the scenes for our listeners here. We actually reached out to you originally on Wednesday, January 14th, because we learned that morning that millions, potentially billions of dollars in federal mental health and substance abuse grants were canceled. What do you remember about that crazy day?
I remember lots of folks reaching out. So many nonprofits in our community are doing really important and valuable work. And the last year has included lots of surprises about federal funding, what's available, what's not available, who it may be eligible for, et cetera. And each one of those that come down ultimately mean that folks are sitting in their offices trying to figure out how to serve clients, whether it's that afternoon or the next day. And so that day included a few emails and a few text messages and a few phone calls with folks who were really worried about what that change or that cut would mean for the people they serve, their own employees, and their own organizations.
Yeah, it sounds like there was just a lot of panic and chaos in the nonprofit world.
Yeah. And, the nonprofit world isn't exactly the most calm place anyway. So many organizations that are on direct services every day are navigating through chaos. And whether that's, the chaos of long lines of services, the challenges their clients face, the emergencies they face, it's pretty rarely a relaxed place in the first anyway, right? And so these additional changes are really adding a ton of complication to an already hard job.
Yeah. So, at the end of the day, we then found out that the funding was not going to be canceled after all. I guess my question is, no harm, no foul, right?
Maybe not so much. Look, it's great to continue to have funding. And obviously, there's a really big set of changes. And I think a really big and important conversation to have at a national level and a local level about what should be funded, what are our expectations of funding, et cetera, et cetera. But even though dollars were essentially restored that afternoon or the cancellations were rescinded, you still have this challenge that folks experienced that day. But I think more importantly is part of a larger set of disruptions that the sector is facing at the moment. And so, no, I wouldn't say no harm, no foul. Great that money's still there. And I think so many nonprofit leaders and professionals at this point are thinking a lot about what's next, what may be next. So I think that there's more challenging news, I think, ahead. And so it's just tough out there right now.
Yeah. So it almost in a way kind of highlighted the precarity of nonprofit funding in this moment. Does it kind of feel like more unsettled? Things feel less, I guess, predictable in that sector?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the big challenge, at least in my opinion, and I should just quickly acknowledge, at Nevada Grant Lab, we're a nonprofit, but we're not on the direct service line the way so many of our colleagues are. And so I can just tell you what it looks like from the bleachers. I think that the reality is that it's really important for organizations to have money to do services, right? But just like any other businesses, they also need certainty. And that lack of certainty can be as problematic as losing money. I think that no organizations probably want to just give up a grant unnecessarily. But the lack of certainty around funding is super challenging. And I think in some cases, maybe even more challenging than not having the money. And don't get me wrong, everyone wants to keep the grants they have.
Of course.
And I think so many people also understand that, administrations change, whether it's a president or a mayor or a governor, and things change with federal funding or things change with funding as administrations change. So it's always a hard transition year, but this one's been particularly challenging.
Okay. So what are some concrete examples of how precarity impacts Southern Nevada's, like actual people on the ground?
Yeah, in grant funding, I think something that folks don't often understand if they don't work in grants or in nonprofits that are grant funded is that it's pretty rare for a grant to fund 100% of a program or a position. Often, what's happening is you have multiple grants that are all funding the same program,
Okay.
and or you may have a position that is funded by multiple grants. And so a change in one of those has this or can have this like cascading implication for
Hmm.
other funding sources. And so I think the certainty around federal funding is particularly important because federal funding, especially in things like healthcare, make up so much of the base funding that
Oh,
when you start losing some of the certainty around funding sources, especially on short notice, it really isn't just that one grant usually. It's multiple programs or multiple positions that may be tied to one funding. So it's the immediate program, the subject of that grant, and all the other things that are attached to that grant, that person, or that program.
sure. So, like, for example, if a federal grant is subsidizing 30% of a person's income, if you lose that grant, you can't hire that person at all for the next year. You can't renew because you can't afford their full salary. Is that kind of the idea behind it?
Yeah, you got it. Even before any of the changes we're talking about today or this administration, the reality is Nevada's nonprofit sector has been grossly underfunded, undersized,
Mm.
and understaffed for a long time.
Hmm.
And so few of our organizations have the ability to really they don't have liquidity. They don't have a bunch of money sitting in a savings account. They also have low abilities often to go and borrow money. And so if you lose 30% of the revenue that's needed for a position, that's a right now, this payroll cycle problem in many
Mm.
cases.
Okay. Okay. How do we stack? Do you have stats on this? I'm curious. How do we stack up against other states in terms of, like, you said that Nevada's nonprofits are grossly underfunded, under resourced. What does that look like in terms of numbers?
Yeah, sure. So, as a state, what we wanted to do at Grant Lab a couple years ago, because we often hear questions about, is the sector too big? Is it too small? How many employees does it have? That sort of stuff. We do this sort of research every couple years to try to provide information. So, a couple years ago, we looked at Nevada's nonprofit sector and wanted to understand how large is it. And on paper, it's more than 14,000 nonprofits. So if you go and look at the IRS and state of Nevada information, you'll find more than 14,000, or at least at this time, it was 2023. There were more than 14,000 nonprofits that exist on paper. But if you apply a really simple filter, one full-time employee and $1 of expense, that 14 plus thousand number shrinks to just 650. And so
Whoa.
the vast majority of our nonprofits that exist on paper don't have an employee and don't have any expenses. And
Wait. I'm so confused by this. What does that mean? What is a nonprofit without an employee or expenses? Like, does it just sort of exist as a vanity project? Like, what are those?
so I think that there's a few different cases. One is that it's an all volunteer organization, right?
Ah,
And those are really important in our nonprofit ecosystem. It's great to have organizations that are volunteer run and volunteer led.
do you have any examples of those?
Yeah, sure. So I think you have different ones that if you think about maybe a scholarship fund, maybe
Hmm.
think about someone who founded a scholarship fund because someone in their lives passed away and they wanted to create a scholarship fund to support kids in college or folks going to become nurses or whatever,
Hmm.
right? That organization may be raising money and they may
Hmm.
be spending money on scholarships, but they probably don't have a full-time employee. So
Mm.
our view as an organization is all of these different types of organizations are important. And if we're really serious about getting to the quality and quantity of services that Nevadans need, whether that's in the arts or affordable housing, it's going to take organizations that have employees and expenses. And unfortunately, that's a really small number here in Nevada. And so you were asking about comparisons. The reality is Nevada has just a fraction of nonprofits that similar sized regions have. And let me drill in here and say, as someone who has lived in Las Vegas and Nevada most of my whole life, or almost all of my life, I often hear kind of the explanations of, why Nevada may have certain things or doesn't have. And so what we wanted to do was look at the Las Vegas region and say, okay, let's look at other regions that share some of our attributes and characteristics. So like average household income, predominantly communities of color, regions that rely on hospitality and tourism to drive, maybe states that don't have a state income tax or a legislature that meets every other year. And so we compared Las Vegas, the metropolitan statistical area, to San Antonio, to New Orleans, and to Orlando, three cities that have
these
combinations.
Are sister cities?
Yeah, combinations in those ways that are kind of sister cities. And what we ultimately found was Nevada has just 15 active nonprofits per 100,000 residents compared to 25 plus in those peer regions.
Wow.
We learned that our nonprofit spending is just $783 annually compared to $4,007, right? So just about 20 cents on the dollar of what our peers are spending.
Okay.
So it's really looking at the number of people in those other regions. What are their nonprofit spending? They're spending $4,000 per capita annually. We're spending $783. And so I think it helps to illustrate that so many of the organizations that we really rely on in Nevada were already so short-staffed and underfunded. So what happens, if a grant changes, and by the way, we're talking about federal money. The reality is local money changes too. So do charitable contributions. Things change. The difference here is the suddenness, as well as the significant amount of money at stake. Because federal funding really is like the baseline. It's the bottom of the pyramid. It is the foundation for so many different types of services, especially in things like healthcare. So you asked about SAMHSA. So many healthcare services and facilities and programs.
And that's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
Yep. And so many things in physical and primary care and mental health are funded at a federal level. And so if that bedrock of funding gets shaky, gets porous, or big chunks of it fall away, the relatively marginal amount of money that the local and state governments and philanthropy contribute on top of that really don't have much to stand on. So it's a big, big problem.
You're saying this is particularly pronounced in Nevada because we have such a small expenditure on nonprofits locally that we rely even more heavily on federal grants. Is that kind of the implication?
Yeah, you got it. I think there's another part of this story that's really important too, is that because there's so little local and state funding, and when I say local and state funding, what I'm referring to is the revenue that our local governments and our state government generate through things like taxes and fees. We're a pretty small state budget per capita. And I think one of the things that makes Nevada really unique is that we're really relying on nonprofits to be service providers. And so if you think about different states and even some counties and cities around the country, especially back east, those folks are more likely to be direct service providers. You may have government employees being direct service providers. Here in Nevada, we've for a long time kind of elected this much smaller state government model. And as a result, we've looked...
The infamous libertarian streak we have in Nevada, right?
Right.
Or famous, I don't know, depending on your point of view.
But what that means is that I think in many cases for the better, and in some cases for the worse, we're relying on nonprofit organizations to be frontline service providers because state government's not doing it. Local governments aren't doing it.
On top of it all, I mean, the economy in Las Vegas has been in a really precarious place too. I mean, we've seen these dips and uncertainty there. Are nonprofits looking at maybe like a dwindling pool of charitable giving as well?
Yeah, I think it's one of the hallmarks of Las Vegas, that kind of roller coaster of economics. When things are really good, they're great. When things are really bad, they're terrible. Nonprofits are absolutely going to feel they already are in certain ways, any sort of constriction. And alternatively, when the economy is really good, typically you see a little bit more money flowing to nonprofits. And so they're absolutely tied. Their financial health is tied to the larger economy, just like their workforce issues are. They're not out there existing on some island untouched by things. The economy goes down, their donations are going to go down. And by the way, that's also when their service demand is going to go up. And so
right.
that's one of the
That's
really
the
challenging
irony.
things. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember during the pandemic just seeing lines and lines and lines of cars, just, gearing up to go get boxes of food from places like Aloha Kitchen, right? Or I volunteered at this like vegan food pantry, and it was just down, like, you couldn't even see the end of the line of cars. And it was just such a tough time for our city economically when I knew that people had less to give, but there was just such a greater need than ever before. And it seems like we're approaching something, maybe not to that degree, but it's starting to feel like echoes of 2020 in a way.
Yeah. Sonia, first I want to say, I remember those car lines too, and I think so many people do. And they were absolutely heartbreaking. I think what they also should be is reminders of what we as people, as a community, are capable of. Somebody was working that car line. Somebody coordinated that car line. Somebody showed up like you and volunteered at that. Somebody donated to it. And so I think that it is both those moments where we see how vulnerable and how challenging life is, and how I think special the sector is and how great the people who are part of it are. I think it's also a great illustration back to the conversation about like, what do we rely on? Nobody showed up at a state government building looking for food. They went to food pantries and car lines run by nonprofits. And so at this moment that there was this national crisis, right, the pandemic, that was further aggravated by IT issues at the state and staffing that didn't get unemployment checks out quick enough, et cetera, ultimately it was nonprofits who stepped up to try to make sure people got food. And I think that that's something to be really proud of. I think it's also something to really protect, because to your point, there are elements in our economy right now and in our society that make me concerned that the demand for services is going up. And, while I don't have every statistic in front of me, I think that most people understand it's getting harder for many people, not just in our community, but in our country,
every
right?
week. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's getting harder for people. And so as things get harder, they're going to turn more and more to their community and often nonprofits for help. And so I hope that, even though there's plenty to be discouraged by at the moment for so many people, I also think there's plenty of reasons to recast it as an opportunity to think about how we treat each other and how we work together.
Yeah. Well, let's end on this note then. How can the community step up for nonprofits? I'm going to hazard a guess. The first one is money.
Sure. Money is always helpful. Money's always helpful. What is also helpful, I think, is being asked. So often I think folks, well-intentioned plenty of the time, think, okay, well, I'm going to do this that will help a nonprofit. I would just encourage anyone who's already involved as maybe a donor, whether it's a small recurring donor to an organization or a really significant one, maybe reach out to the nonprofit and ask them what they need. Yes, I'm sure they're going to tell you money. They may also have something else that they need. Maybe they need you to come and volunteer. And maybe that volunteerism looks like helping pack a food bag, right? Maybe it also looks something more like professional in a sense of, maybe you're a marketing expert and you can help them think about how to update their website or update a newsletter to help communicate with people. So really thinking about what you can do to be helpful beyond, or in addition to, I should say, whatever financial contribution someone can help make.
Is there a place where people can find a list of local nonprofits that they might want to work with?
I wish there was this amazing guide to nonprofits in Nevada. There's a few different versions that are all pretty good. One I would suggest is check out United Way of Southern Nevada. They have great information on what's happening in our community. Every year, the Las Vegas Sun, I think in Vegas Inc., publishes a really great guide. So there's that. There's also resources like Candid, or it's called GuideStar, the Foundation Center, some of these different national organizations that are tracking local or nonprofits all across the country. I can assure you a Google or a ChatGPT search is going to get you pretty far to find a great place to be helpful.
Amazing. Well, Miles, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights on this really important topic.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much for covering it.
And that's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, go tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. Don't forget you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Las Vegas neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Take care.